In the University of New Hampshire auditorium, Professor Daniel Hargrove began his lecture with unwavering confidence. It's time to move past the myths. Religion has held humanity back for centuries. And one of the biggest stories still shaping countless lives is Jesus. Let's be clear, Jesus is just a fairy tale. The students sat in silence. Some nodded in agreement, while others quietly took notes. But as she walked through the hallway, Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in history, visiting campus to speak about Gen Z's role in politics, overheard his words. She stopped, her hand clenching into a fist. Having faced immense pressures at the White House, she was no stranger to controversy. But calling the foundation of her faith and values a fairy tale, that was something she couldn't ignore. Inside the auditorium, Hargrove continued, his voice sharp as a blade. The story of Jesus, a man said to walk on water, turn water into wine, and rise from the dead, is no different from Greek mythology or Viking legends. There is no reliable historical evidence confirming his existence as the Bible claims. It's all a product of imagination, woven to control the masses for centuries. The room remained silent. Some students frowned, while others discreetly scrolled through their phones. A girl in the front row scribbled notes furiously, while a guy in the back looked bored. Hargrove smirked, reveling in the attention. I know this may be hard for some of you to hear, he continued, but it's time we grow up and leave childish stories behind. Science and reason are the only paths to progress. Religion, especially the Jesus myth, is just baggage from the past. He paused, as if expecting applause. But instead, the door clicked open. Karoline Leavitt stepped in. Her petite yet commanding figure was clad in a deep blue suit, her eyes blazing with determination. The students turned, murmuring excitedly, "Isn't that her? She's from the White House." Hargrove frowned, clearly displeased by the interruption. Karoline took a deep breath and stepped forward, her heels clicking against the wooden floor like an unspoken challenge. She stopped in the aisle, locking eyes with the professor. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm, echoing through the room. "I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just heard you say Jesus is a fairy tale, and I have to say, you're wrong." The auditorium held its breath. Hargrove raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. "And who might you be?" he replied, his tone laced with sarcasm. "I didn't expect a politician to care about my history class. Are you here to defend this myth?" Karoline didn't flinch. She stepped onto the podium, standing just a few feet from Hargrove, arms crossed confidently, the stance of a press secretary used to tough debates. "I'm not here to defend a myth," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "I'm here to defend the truth. You say there's no evidence for Jesus? Then how do you explain Tacitus, a non-Christian Roman historian who recorded Jesus' execution under Pontius Pilate? Or Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian who mentioned Jesus as a real figure with major influence? These aren't from the Bible, they're independent historical sources." The students began whispering, some pulling out their phones to look it up. Hargrove crossed his arms, his smirk intact. "Leave it. Right?" he said coolly. "You might be a good mouthpiece for Trump, but don't bring your political games into my classroom. Those sources, if they're even real, are just fragmented anecdotes written decades after the fact. They prove nothing beyond someone telling a good story." Karoline tilted her head, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "A good story?" she echoed, her voice rising with sarcasm. "Then why did that story change the world? Why have billions lived and died for it? You can call it a fairy tale, but you can't deny Jesus' impact, historical or religious. Take your pick. Dismissing him entirely isn't science, it's arrogance." The room buzzed. A student clapped, then hesitated, awkwardly lowering his hands as all eyes turned toward him. Hargrove's lips twitched. prepared for a strong counter. "Who do you think you are, Miss Leavitt?" he asked, his voice hardening. "A theologian? A historian? Or just a mouthpiece for outdated ideas?" Karoline smiled. But there was no warmth in it. "I'm someone who believes in truth," she replied, her voice steady as steel. "And the truth is, you just insulted millions, including me, by calling Jesus fiction without a strong enough argument. If you want a debate, I'm ready." The University of New Hampshire auditorium became an arena. Professor Daniel Hargrove stood at the podium, arms crossed, his icy gaze fixed on Karoline. The students filled the seats, eyes wide, some already filming with their phones, unwilling to miss a moment. Karoline, petite in her deep blue suit, stood firm in the aisle, unfazed by his glare. The air was taut, waiting for a spark to ignite it. Hargrove broke the silence, his voice thick with sarcasm. "Miss Leavitt, do you really think you can just waltz in here and lecture me? You believe a few scraps from Tacitus or Josephus make Jesus real? How disappointing from someone who claims to be informed." He shook his head, as if scolding a naive child. Karoline's lips twitched, her eyes flashing with defiance. "Disappointing?" she echoed, her tone rising with mockery. "I don't need you to know who I am to say you're wrong. You think dismissing anything that doesn't fit your rational box is clever? No. I'm standing here for what I believe, for what my family, my Catholic faith, and history have taught me." She took another step forward, her voice firm as nails. "Jesus isn't just a name in a book. He was real. And you can't deny that just because you don't like it." The students stirred, whispers rising. Hargrove let out a dry laugh, but it couldn't mask his irritation. "Oh, Catholic faith," he said, dripping with mockery. "Is that the armor you're hiding behind? I suppose working for Trump forces you to cling to fairy tales for justification. But let's be honest. Miss Leavitt, do you really believe he walked on water, turned water into wine, rose from the dead? Is that what you want these students to buy into?" He gestured to the room, inviting them to join in ridiculing her. Karoline took a deep breath, staying calm, but her eyes burned. "I'm not here to force anyone to believe in miracles," she replied, her voice steady but unyielding. "That's a personal choice. But I'm here to say that calling Jesus pure fiction is flat out wrong. You want sources? Tacitus recorded his execution under Pilate. Josephus mentioned Jesus as a real figure leading a major movement. This isn't legend, it's history. You don't have to believe he's the Son of God. But denying he existed? That's willfully blinding yourself to the truth." Hargrove crossed his arms, tilting his head, the smirk returning. "History, you say? Scattered anecdotes written by people who saw nothing, decades after it all ended? You call that evidence? I call it hearsay, inflated by a fanatic mob. You seem smart, Miss Leavitt. But clearly, you'd rather swallow what's spoon-fed to you than analyze it." His words struck like a dagger. Karoline stood taller, her gaze locked on him. "Analyze?" she said, her voice lowering but brimming with power. "That's why I'm here. I don't swallow anything blindly. I grew up in a Catholic family in New Hampshire, played softball to build grit, and learned to see truth through both reason and heart. You can mock my faith, but you can't erase Jesus' impact, not just on me, but on billions who have lived by his teachings." The room fell silent, all eyes on Karoline. She offered a small, genuine smile, the first in the debate. "Thanks for the question," she said, her tone warming. "I believe in the power of Jesus's ideas: love, forgiveness, sacrifice. Miracles? That's up to you. But don't let anyone tell you he didn't exist. He changed how we live, how we build societies. That's fact, not fairy tale." Hargrove laughed loudly, no longer masking his frustration. "Ideas? Huh? You're turning a fictional figure into a symbol to prop up your conservative politics. I know this game, you learned it from Trump. Didn't you? Using emotion to override reason. But here, in this classroom, we deal in facts, not sappy feelings. Karoline tilted her head, her eyes sharp as a blade. Facts? She echoed, her voice rising with defiance. The fact is, you just insulted me and millions of others by calling Jesus fiction, without an argument beyond your own arrogance. And you say I use emotion? Fine. I'm human, not a robot. But don't get it twisted. My case rests on history, not feelings. You dismiss everything that doesn't fit your worldview. Is that reason? Or just stubbornness? The room erupted in murmurs. A girl in the front row clapped, then stopped when Hargrove shot her a sharp glance. Another student called out, "She's got a point." Hargrove's fists clenched, his face tightening. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by an outsider barging into his class. You want to argue emotions? He snapped. Fine. But keep your politics and superstitions out of my classroom. Karoline took another step forward. Her eyes locked onto his. I didn't bring politics here, she said, her voice as solid as steel. I brought truth, something you seem to have forgotten how to face. If you want to keep going, I'm game. A wave of whispers rose. Phones held high, capturing every second. Professor Daniel Hargrove, fists clenched, stood rigid at the podium. Karoline, petite but commanding in her deep blue suit, stood a few steps away, unshaken. Hargrove took a deep breath, struggling to regain composure, but his voice still trembled with frustration. You call me stubborn, Miss Leavitt? He growled, pointing at her. I've spent my life studying history, analyzing sources, while you, a young woman who's just a mouthpiece, dare lecture me on truth. You think a few scraps from Tacitus and Josephus are enough to make me bow to your Jesus? Ridiculous. You walk into my class with this confidence, but your politics and superstitions have blinded you. Karoline's lips curled into a faint, unyielding smile. Blinded? She repeated, her voice laced with defiance. No. I stand here because I see the truth, one you refuse to accept. I don't need to be your student to know that dismissing everything outside your rational box is a mistake. I grew up in a Catholic family in New Hampshire. Learned to question, to dig deep, because I don't settle for easy answers. And now I'm here, not for politics, not for superstition, but for truth. A truth history has proven. The students held their breath. Hargrove let out a dry laugh, but it rang hollow. Your truth, he sneered. Your truth is a story spun by a fanatic mob, used by you and people like Trump to manipulate emotions. You say Jesus changed the world? Sure. I won't deny the myth's influence. But influence isn't proof of existence. Hitler influenced the world too. Does that make him a god? Karoline took another step, her eyes blazing. Don't compare Jesus to Hitler, she said, her voice like steel. That's a cheap trick. And you know it. Jesus taught love and forgiveness. Hitler brought death and destruction. But if you want to talk about influence, look at the laws, the morals, the society we live in. Where did those values come from? From Jesus' teachings. A real person, not a fiction. You may not believe he was the Son of God, but don't pretend he didn't leave a mark deeper than anyone in history. Hargrove crossed his arms, his eyes flashing with anger. You really are Trump's disciple, he said coldly. All flashy words, no substance. You think those clichés will sway anyone here? These students are smarter than that. They want truth, not feelings. He turned to the crowd, gesturing broadly. Tell me, do you believe her or science? A female student in the middle row raised her hand, hesitant. But if there are documents mentioning Jesus, doesn't that prove he was real? Another student chimed in. Yeah, Tacitus wasn't Christian. Why would he make it up? Whispers spread. A few nodded in agreement. Hargrove spun back, his face reddening. "Those documents aren't reliable," he snapped. "They were written too late. Possibly forged. Or just rumors. You want to believe rumors? That's not science. That's naivete." He pointed at Karoline. "And you prey on that naivete. Just like you do at the White House. I expected someone barging in here to bring a better argument." Karoline stepped onto the podium. Now level with Hargrove. Her voice was low but powerful. Like crashing waves. "Expected?" she echoed. "You expect everyone to just agree with you? Dismissing anything that doesn't suit you? I'm not naive, Professor. I learned from life. And life taught me that truth isn't just in your books. I grew up building resilience through softball. And I know how to see truth with both reason and heart." Hargrove hesitated. Stepping back half a pace. Caught off guard by her intensity. "You think your personal story makes you right?" he growled. "I don't care how you grew up. I care about evidence. Real evidence, not the fragmented anecdotes you keep repeating." Karoline's smile turned victorious. "Real evidence?" she repeated. "You want evidence? Look at history. Without Jesus, do you think we'd have hospitals, schools, or the concept of human rights? Those didn't just appear. They came from his teachings. You can call them anecdotes, but I call them the foundation of our world." The students erupted into applause. No longer shy. A girl shouted, "She's right." Another student held up his phone. "I just looked it up, Tacitus is real." Hargrove clenched his fists. His lips tightening into a thin line. He wasn't used to the crowd turning on him, especially because of an outsider who had stormed into his class. "You're good at polishing yourself," he said bitterly. "But don't expect me to buy into this performance. You might fool them. But you won't fool me." Karoline met his gaze. "Fearless. I don't need to fool anyone," she replied. "The truth speaks for itself. I stand for what I believe. And I won't stay silent just because you refuse to listen." She held her ground at the podium. Her deep blue suit crisp under the bright auditorium lights. The students leaned in. Their phones still recording. Their attention locked on her. Professor Hargrove, gripping the edge of the lectern, flickered between anger and something else, uncertainty. For the first time in the debate, he didn't respond immediately. The crowd waited. Karoline took a slow breath. Her voice softer but no less powerful. "If you see this as a loss, maybe the problem isn't me. It's how you view truth." Her words struck like a final blade, not cruel, but sharp, leaving the room in heavy silence. Students murmured, some nodding, others glancing at Hargrove, waiting for his reaction. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His gaze dropped to the worn wooden floor, searching for an answer. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Had he missed something? Had he been wrong to shut his mind to what couldn't be measured? A male student in the middle row raised his hand, his voice hesitant. "Miss Leavitt, what do you mean by impact? Do you actually believe in the miracles?" Karoline didn't let the silence linger. She turned to the crowd. Her voice warm yet commanding. "I'm not here to force you to believe Jesus is the Son of God," she said, scanning the students' faces. "That's your choice. But dismissing him entirely, calling him a fairy tale, that's dishonest. Science doesn't explain all of humanity. History isn't just data, it's about people, ideas, and movements that shaped our world. Jesus was one of them. He was real. And he matters." A male student in the back raised his hand, his voice curious. "But if science can't prove miracles, why do you still believe?" Karoline smiled, this time sincerely. "Good question," she replied. "I believe because I see the power in his teachings, love, forgiveness, sacrifice. I grew up with them. I live them every day. Miracles? That's up to you. But don't let anyone tell you he didn't exist just because we can't measure everything." Hargrove looked up, his gaze no longer harsh but thoughtful. Karoline's words echoed in his mind. stirring something buried, a memory of his early days as a scholar. When he read the Bible not to debunk but to understand. When had he changed? When had he decided that reason alone was everything? That anything unmeasurable was an illusion? He looked at Karoline again. And for the first time, he didn't see a naive fool, he saw a woman who had found something bigger. Something he might have lost. The students grew livelier. A girl in the front stood. Her voice excited. I agree with her. If Jesus wasn't real, why did the whole world change because of him? Another guy jumped in. But if it's just influence, why argue? Hitler had influence too. Karoline turned to him. Her eyes sharp. Don't repeat that cheap comparison, she said. Hitler destroyed. Jesus built. His influence is the foundation of the best in us. That's the difference. Hargrove frowned but didn't counter immediately. He stepped aside. His hand resting on the desk as if needing support. Am I really being honest? He wondered. He had spent a lifetime denying Jesus, dismissing faith. But now, facing Karoline's arguments and the students' support, he felt a crack in the wall of his certainty. He looked at her, his voice lowering, this time free of sarcasm. You say science doesn't explain all of humanity, he said slowly. But if we don't rely on science, what do we rely on? Emotion? Faith? Is that what you want these students to learn? Karoline nodded. Her eyes steady. I want them to learn to think for themselves, she replied. Science is an incredible tool, and I respect it. But it's not everything. Faith, history, emotion, they're part of being human too. I didn't need you to teach me to question. To know that not every answer comes from a lab. Jesus doesn't need a test tube to prove he was real. He proved it through what he left behind. The students erupted in applause. Some even shouting, she's right. Hargrove stood there, his hand trembling slightly. He looked around at the young faces watching him, not with blind awe, but with curiosity, challenge. He wondered, have I been too rigid? Did I miss something she sees? The tension in the air had shifted into an uncontainable energy. Karoline turned to the students, her voice ringing with warmth and strength. You're Gen Z, my generation, she said, her gaze sweeping over them. I'm not here to force you to believe anything. I just want you to think for yourselves. Jesus isn't a fairy tale. He's part of history. Part of what made us. He was real. And he matters. You want to dismiss him? Fine. But do it with truth, not arrogance. And if you have more questions, I'm always game, here or on X. She winked, adding a Gen Z flair that made some students laugh and clap even louder. Karoline stepped off the podium. Not to leave, but to stand closer to the crowd. She raised a hand to quiet them, her voice lowering but magnetic. I don't need you to agree with me, she said. I just want you to question, like I did. She glanced at Hargrove, her expression not hostile but respectful. Hargrove watched her, and for the first time, he saw not an adversary but a reminder of why he once loved teaching. When did I close my mind? He wondered. The students didn't notice his silence, they were too caught up in the moment. A guy in the back yelled, you should be a professor here. Another girl raised her phone. I'm posting this on X right now, #Karoline wins. Laughter rang out. And Karoline shook her head with a smile. Thanks, she said, a hint of humor in her voice. But I like my White House job better. Less paperwork. The crowd laughed again. But their respect for her remained clear. Hargrove finally spoke, his voice low and slow, no longer sharp. Are you done, Miss Leavitt? He asked, his gaze on her, carrying subtle curiosity instead of enmity. Karoline turned and nodded. I'm done, she replied. But I hope you're not. I hope you rethink what I said. Her words weren't an attack but an invitation. A challenge, not harsh, but sharp. Hargrove didn't answer right away. He turned to the students. Class ends here today, he said. stepping off the podium and grabbing his briefcase. Some students whispered. Surprised. Did he just give up? But Hargrove hadn't given up. He just needed time. As he walked toward the door, he glanced back at Karoline one last time. A flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. Though he didn't say it, he knew she had made him think. Karoline stood among the students, a few gathering around her with questions. How do you stay so calm? A girl asked. I'm not always calm, Karoline laughed. Another student jumped in. Do you think the professor will change his mind? Karoline looked toward the door, where Hargrove had just left. I hope so, she said. He's a smart man. I just want him to reconsider. Outside, as Hargrove walked through the quiet hallway, he gripped his briefcase tightly. Behind him, the students still buzzed with energy, and Karoline answered them with unwavering confidence. He gave a faint smile. The first of the day. He wouldn't admit defeat, but he knew he'd been shaken. Back in his office, he set his briefcase down and let out a slow breath. His eyes fell on the bookshelf, thick history books, sources he had studied for decades. He recalled Karoline's words, Jesus doesn't need a test tube to prove he was real. He proved it through what he left behind. Maybe it was time to reread Tacitus and Josephus. Not to agree with Karoline, but to understand, to question, just as he had once urged his students to do. Meanwhile, Karoline stepped outside, breathing in the crisp New Hampshire air. Her phone buzzed with notifications from X and TikTok, videos of the debate spreading like wildfire. But she didn't feel victorious over Hargrove. She felt victorious for standing up for what she believed. And she knew, this wasn't just a viral moment. It was something bigger. Professor Hargrove sat in his office, staring at an old Tacitus manuscript, once dismissed as unreliable. The ancient words now felt weightier. If it's just a myth, why has it endured? Karoline Leavitt had done something no one had in years, made him doubt himself. Outside, the debate had exploded online. White House press secretary takes down professor was racking up thousands of views. The hashtag Karoline wins trended, with Gen Z voices debating faith and history. Some criticized her, but most admired her sharp reasoning and confidence. Karoline, unfazed, sat on a campus bench, replying to a comment, thanks, keep questioning. She texted her husband, today was wild, but I'm okay. How's the little one? His reply came instantly, sleeping soundly. You did great. She smiled. One day, she'd tell her son about standing up for truth. Meanwhile, Hargrove still lingered over his books. The arrogance of the morning was gone. Instead of trying to debunk, he found himself wanting to understand. Tacitus, Josephus, cultural impact. He scribbled notes, unsure where they would lead. But for the first time in years, he wanted to explore. As Karoline drove off into the sunset, her phone buzzed. Her debate had gone viral. The White House wanted her on air that night. Fine, she said. But no script. She had defended faith, history, and Gen Z's voice, not with power, but with truth and courage. Back in his office, Hargrove closed his book, a faint smile on his lips. He jotted down one last note, question, like she did.